So after you've applied some of these summary and close reading skills to your standard to help set the objectives for the unit, how do you teach kids some of those basic critical reading skills to apply to both literary and informational text? Because eventually they're going to be reading the Telltale Heart, and they're going to be reading some current events, which are more very complex. So how do you build those foundational skills?
Well, first I have to teach them exactly what to look for. Even though they may not recall plot structure and things like that, they've been exposed to it, so they know the process of reading a story. And they may have been read to when they were younger, so they know how stories operate. But when it comes more so to informational text, like the magazine articles or anything in that respect, they may not be as prepared. So I go through it with them. I will start for characteristics for reading informational text, and
we'll be on the Prezi in the folded files.
And I found this online, and it talks about what do you look for when you're reading informational text. And it starts from the broadest, the easiest really thing to look for, and then it goes into the more complex, the higher order thinking skills. So we talk about the characteristics and features of informational text, even as simple as what titles are bold, or why are some titles in italics, the subtitles? What does that tell you about the importance of that information in the article?
Look at, call that author's craft and structure.
Right. And then we look at details and why are they significant, and then they start to summarize and find the main ideas, and how do we determine accuracy? Is there enough information in here for us to be able to determine how accurate is this? Is this someone's opinion, or is this actual fact? And then we analyze that writer's purpose for writing it, and then they can start to evaluate it. So,
and this pyramid really goes from simplest to most complex.
Right. And so we'll start there. And what I'll give them normally after we've done Little Red Riding Hood, and I make sure that they have some mastery of that.
And I'm sorry to interrupt. The Little Red Riding Hood could be any simple fairy tale, whether it's from a children's book. You use an online video.
Right.
So it's any basic, simple story that anyone can read or watch.
And I've even had one year, because I had all students from the same place, and they all read The Giver. So I use that as just a recap on something that I know they'd already done. So it can be simple or even a little bit more complex if you know something familiar, right? And so I will give them the Vox newspaper a circulation that goes throughout the state of Georgia.
Student-written articles.
Student-written articles, and sometimes they find their friends and they want to read theirs. And so I have them look for articles, and then I will give them handouts, and I actually have this on my Promethean board also, where they're reading certain articles, and they have to find the characteristics, and then they have to tell what kind of information is presented by this, and why is it important, and they have to show that they understand what they're doing for each level of that pyramid.
What's the characteristic? What kind of information is it? And why is this important?
Why is it important
to the overall selection?
Right, because I don't ever want them to think something in the article is just put there because someone felt like it. It has to be important.
And what's great about this and the other things you use is the first thing is the text.
Right.
The first thing is what is it? What's it say?
Right.
And then it's what kind is it and why is it important? So even that gets more complex in terms of thinking.
Because once they get to the why, they're already thinking critically, whether they know it or not, and it's really going to be something I'm able to build on once we get into the actual text.
And then what else? What other tools are you using in this beginning stage of teaching critical reading?
Yeah, I will give them something else, and then as a class, they'll start to model it on the board where they have to find the most significant details, because I really want them to start focusing on the why instead of the what, because that's what's going to build their analysis skills. And so they will find significant details to the article and tell why they are significant, and be able to express how does this affect the story? What does this mean for the reader? What does this mean for the writer? What does this mean for the people who are involved? And then I start to have them really compare how informational text and things that they will pull from literary text are actually similar. Instead of characters, there are people involved, but they serve the same purpose. We may not have a narrator in an article, but we have a writer who had an opinion, which is why he wrote it. So how is that even similar? You have two audiences. What is the audience supposed to glean from it? So they kind of start to find similarities between them in how they approach it.
You're teaching them a process for critical reading that can be applied to literary and informational. Now you read them differently for different purposes,
right.
but the process of sort of getting to what the author is trying to communicate, what they're trying to say, can be very similar.
Right.
What about, my last question is, these are graphic organizers.
Yes.
Do they use these throughout the entire unit? How do they work in terms of the overall flow of the unit?
Well, I give them these graphic organizers, and they actually keep the first one as a model. So that means anytime that I ask them, find some significant details, and we're going to write about that, they can refer back to this to remember what they did or to show a new student what they did, and they can use it to model for themselves what they need to do this time. So they keep the first set that we do in their notebooks, and then anything after that they may turn in for credit. But they use these, and the one that we put up on the Promethean board, that is, the students come up and write in them. We use them throughout the rest of this unit.
So they would also use it for like the Telltale Heart.
Yeah, well, for the Telltale Heart or any the other articles that we would use along with the Telltale Heart, because I try to keep this one mostly for the informational text, so they can have a point of reference, like, okay, this is informational, this is my thought process, and then I give them something different if we were reading a piece of literature.
So they repeat the process,
right,
again and again
right.
and again.
It's a lot of repetition, a lot of thinking out loud, because my classroom is really discussion based. I need you to talk to me. So
do you give them a blank one every time they read something?
Sometimes. I start giving them blank ones, and after a little while I stop giving it to them, because now you need to be able to just write. This needs to be second nature to you now, and that's where I'm trying to move.
That's real classic scaffolding.
Right.
So you're using this as a scaffold, but then eventually, when they're ready, or if they need a little push, you say, okay, now I want you to just take notes doing this type of thinking without the graphic organizer.
Yes, and then I teach them 2-column notes, and they will start using skills I've taught them for other things to say, okay, this was a great way to organize. I could probably use it for this. And they still ask, is it okay if I use this process, or can I just write it the same way? And as long as they're asking questions, I know they've been thinking about it, so it'll still work. Right.
Excellent. So we're going to post some completed student-made. You're going to email that to us, and we're going to post it on the Prezi. And now we're going to look at how you take some of the similar things that they learned here and apply it to more complex text.